I've had several requests lately to talk a bit about Canada's euthanasia laws, or as our government likes to call it, medical assistance in dying. So therefore, this week on Don't Talk TV, I'm going to look at a bit of the history of how we got these laws and what those laws are. Hello, my name's Nicholas Wansbutt. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. Medical assistance in dying, as they like to call it, to try to hide what's really going on. Let's call it what it is: the murder of people who are critically ill, or coming soon, people who have serious mental health difficulties. This is something that's been in the news a fair bit lately because we're now up to 6 injured veterans who have been offered to be killed by Veterans Affairs Canada instead of being given the support that they need to deal with their injuries and to live a proper life, as one would expect our veterans to receive. In the wake of this, I've received quite a few requests to do a video about what exactly our laws are and how they're changing, because this is a constantly moving target, as we'll see. So we're going to take a look at a number of things. Firstly, the background of what led up to the changing of our laws in this regard. And then we'll look at Bill C-14 that came out in 2016 and Bill C-7 that came out in 2021 and how those changed the law. And I intersperse that, as is my wont, with some of my own commentaries and views on this as we go along. So the genesis of this, legally speaking, not culturally speaking, as I frequently say, stealing a line from Mark Stein, politics are downstream of culture and law is downstream of politics, so the culture comes first. But legally speaking, the genesis of our current laws in regards to killing off seriously ill people is the case of Carter and the Attorney General of Canada. It's a 2015 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm going to leave a link to the decision in the show description. If you want to read it, you can follow that link. In the meantime, I'll just give you the summary from the head notes of it. So firstly, they summarize Section 241 sub B of the Criminal Code as it then was, which is what was being challenged. So that section of the Criminal Code said that everyone who aids or abets a person in committing suicide commits an indictable offense. And then Section 14 of the Criminal Code also said that no person may consent to death being inflicted on them. So this is a reflection of Canada's Christian heritage, the view that God has the ultimate control over your life. You don't get to decide when you die. God decides when you die. Now, what the Supreme Court held was that Section 241 sub B and 14 of the Criminal Code unjustifiably infringe on Section 7 of the Charter. Now remember, Section 7 is the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. It's interesting that they read in a right to death into the right to life, but in any event, they say that it unjustifiably infringes Section 7 of the Charter and are of no force or effect to the extent that they prohibit physician-assisted death for a competent adult who, 1, clearly consents to the termination of life, and 2, has grievous and irremediable medical condition, including an illness, disease, or disability that causes enduring suffering that is intolerable to the individual in the circumstances of his or her condition. Now again, I find it very interesting that the Supreme Court says that not being allowed to kill yourself with the assistance of a physician and not being able to help someone kill themselves, that violates the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And it's also very interesting when one juxtaposes that with things that the courts have said are not violations of the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, or at least are justifiable violations. Now, granted, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on these things, but one need only look back a few months to consider losing your job if you don't take a certain injection, or being locked inside your home, being confined inside your home, not being allowed to go to church, etc. Our courts say that those aren't violations, or if they are violations, they're justifiable, but killing people, that's unjustifiable. You have to be allowed to do it. Again, that comes back to the cultural things. And now this case This was after many years of litigation, so that goes back to my point of culture, and that's part of how common law works, is that common law allows for the courts to adapt with the times and as the culture changes, and to change the laws or change the interpretation of laws based upon the cultural mores of the time. So as Canada has become more secular, godless, and materialistic, the courts have reflected that in their decisions. Now, the Supreme Court suspended this decision for a year, so they gave the government a year to change the laws. And that's where we get Bill C-14, which is 2016, received royal assent June the 17th of 2016. So some of the key highlights of this bill is Section 14 of the Criminal Code, the section that did not allow people to consent to their own death, was replaced with a new Section 14 that says no person is entitled to consent to have death inflicted on them, and such consent does not affect the criminal responsibility of any person who inflicts death on the person who gave consent. However, then there's exceptions added. So Section 227 sub 1 says that no medical practitioner or nurse practitioner commits culpable homicide if they provide a person with medical assistance in dying in accordance with Section 241.2. So you still can't consent to being killed by a family member, but medical practitioners are immune from the new Section 14. And for greater clarity, they also have subsection 4 to that section says that Section 14 does not apply with respect to a person who consents to have a death inflicted on them by means of medical assistance in dying, provided it's in accordance with this new Section 241.2. And then they have further clarification that for greater certainty, no social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, medical practitioner, nurse practitioner, or other healthcare professional commits an offense if they provide information to a person on the lawful provision of medical assistance in dying. So the social worker exemption here, this is what gives rise to these people from Veterans Affairs Canada telling veterans to kill themselves instead of giving them what they deserve. And there won't be any consequences for those people, at least no criminal consequences by virtue of this section. And then Section 241.2 lays out the tests for when a person may receive medical assistance in dying. So that's only if they meet these criteria. So one, if they're eligible for health services funded by a government in Canada. So basically they put that in there to avoid suicide tourism where people from other countries would come here to make use of our laws. You have to be someone who already had an OHIP card or your provincial health card. You have to be 18 years of age and capable of making decisions, have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. They've made a voluntary request for medical assistance in dying with no external pressure, and they gave informed consent to receive medical assistance in dying after having been informed. Then they give some definitions on what is a grievous and irremediable medical condition. So it has to meet the criteria that it's serious and incurable disease, they're in advanced state of decline, the illness or disability causes them enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them, which of course is entirely subjective. I mean, you just need to say the magic words, it's intolerable. There's no way of testing whether it actually is. And sub D, the natural death has become reasonably foreseeable. So that's what then paved the way for Bill C-7, because there was then a case that went to the Quebec Court of Appeal, and the Quebec Court of Appeal said that, well, the fact that death has to be reasonably foreseeable, that violates Section 7 as well. So rather than appeal that to the Supreme Court of Canada, the Liberal government just went straight to pass a new law. So that then brings us to Bill C-7, which received royal assent on March the 17th of 2021. Now, here's one of the key changes. We looked at those requirements under Section 241.2, and subsection 2 dealt with what was the irremediable medical condition. Now, they added in a section that they removed the section saying, they repealed paragraph D, saying that it had to be foreseeable death. Then they added in a section saying that for the purpose of paragraph 2A, a mental illness is not considered to be an illness, disease, or disability. So for a time, mental illness was not considered something that would qualify one for having a doctor kill them. However, then there's this section 2.1. Now, it's a bit confusing the way this bill is written. It seems like another 2.1. What it actually is 2.1 of section 1 of the bill. So this is 1 sub 2.1, and what that does is it repeals the section that was just created by section 1 subsection 2, which is this one here saying that section 241.2 is amended. So for that to make sense, you have to go all the way to the coming into force section, and it says subsection 1 sub 2.1 comes into force on the second anniversary of the day in which this act receives royal assent. So as we discussed, it received royal assent March the 17th of 2021, so March the 17th of 2022, subsection 2 sub 2.1 gets removed, and now a mental health condition such as crushing depression now doctors can kill that person with their consent. Someone can consent, which I think has huge dangers for manipulation. People who are very depressed, that can come and go. You could be in the depths of despair, and now you can just go and get a doctor to kill you. Now, I mean, granted, people who are in that situation, they might try killing themselves already, which is terrible. My personal view is that it would be better to give these people more supports. Instead of funneling all these resources into creating the ability for doctors to kill people, funnel it into better mental health resources and support for people, and building up a society that is more enjoyable to live in. People didn't want to kill themselves 50, 60, 70 years ago. Why is that? Maybe we should look at how is society different back then versus how it is now. Many people try to give the impression or suggest that things are much better now than they were in the past. Yet, how come we need laws like this now? Why are people in such despair? I think those are questions for another video, and there are questions probably for another channel. This is focused on the law. These aren't legal questions. These are more philosophical and sociological questions. But I think they're worth thinking about, and looking at our law raises those questions. And it's good for them to raise those questions and for people to think about that. And again, I come back to culture preceding all of these things. And I've said it many times before on this channel, these things aren't going to be turned around with a lawsuit. I mean, the highest court in the land has already said that to the government, you must legalize euthanasia. So there's no court cases that are going to change this. Society needs to be changed if you're opposed to this happening. And that happens one family at a time, in my view. Educating yourself, getting back to God, as I've recommended before, teaching your children, raising good citizens. So this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, call a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My phone number and website are listed below. If there's show topics you'd like to see me cover on this channel, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.